Well, I got some pictures of all of you together. Here's your mom.
Thanks, Ginger. This is Ginger. Of course.
Okay. Do you want standing, sitting, or want to do? One sitting,
We'll stand
profession.
up.
Weird light happening, so we'll just do a couple and see what works. Yes. Business. And then you guys want to do a stand?
We got a minute. Wait a second.
Oh, this glare is so weird.
We should turn.
Okay, I think we're okay. We're okay. Oh, yes. So good. Okay.
Thank you, girls. Beautiful. Yes, of course.
You need the door or leave it? You want the door open or
we can close it so that the sound stays in, but okay, it's exactly 3 o'clock. If we was at the barbecue, we would start at 3:05. We're not at the barbecue, so we're just gonna get started right now. And I also want to preface with, we would have had a projector. We had a really nice visual presentation for you all, but we are willing to share it. So we'll collect some emails and you can see that. So we're going to have the presentation on our devices, and we'll show you all later, but we're going to get started. Hey, Silas, and yes, thank you for being here. So good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by saying that this conversation is more than theory. It is more than an academic exercise. This is about how we know, how we move, how we survive, and ultimately how we liberate. This is about shifting not just what we teach, but how we teach, how we honor the knowledge that lives in our bodies, our communities, our grandmother's wisdom, and the truths we speak in spaces that were never meant to hold us.
But we know better.
Wait, sorry,
So today we are not just talking about education, we are talking about presence, radical, undeniable, Black feminist presence. Because the dominant world has always told us to wait, to prepare, to be patient, to work towards some distant future where justice might come, where equity might be realized. But Black feminist epistemology teaches us that we don't have to wait, that the future isn't something that we hope for, it's something we create right now, in this very moment, and how we show up, how we teach, how we love, and how we resist.
Why Black feminist epistemology? Let's be real. Traditional education as we know it was never designed with us in mind. It wasn't built to hold Black women's brilliance, our complexity, our stories, or our ways of knowing. It is a system that tells us that knowledge is only valid if it is objective, measurable, disconnected from the body, from emotion, from lived experience. It tells us that knowledge only counts if it comes from a textbook or a scholar with the right credentials, never from the wisdom passed down at kitchen tables or from the gut level knowing of what it means to navigate this world as a Black woman.
Patricia Hill Collins teaches us that Black women's ways of knowing have been deliberately erased. Yet they have always been a source of power. Audre Lorde reminds us that the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house, which we cannot reshape education using the same epistemologies that have devalued us. Bell Hooks calls on us to bring love into the classroom, to make education an act of healing, liberation, and not just instruction.
So when we talk about education as a radical act of presence, We are talking about an epistemology that centers around lived experiences, that values the knowledge produced in community, that refuses to separate theory from practice, and that understands that feeling, anger, joy, love, grief is a valid and necessary part of how we learn and how we know.
Radical presence in education. Education as a radical act of presence means that we are not just preparing students for the future, we are teaching them how to be fully here in the now. It means that instead of seeing education as a conveyor belt moving students toward a predefined outcome, we see it as a space where students learn to exist in their fullness, to name their realities, to imagine and build new worlds. It means we reject the idea that knowledge belongs only in elite institutions, in peer-reviewed journals, or in standardized curricula. It means we acknowledge that knowledge lives in Black storytelling, in process chants, in hip-hop, and the ways we care for one another, and the spiritual and ancestral wisdom that guides us even when we don't have the words to name it. It also means that we as educators, scholars, and organizers must challenge ourselves to disrupt the ways we've been taught to gatekeep knowledge. Because if we are truly about transformation, then we have to be willing to unlearn, to let go the need for academic respectability, to make space for Black feminist knowledge that does not fit into white patriarchal frameworks.
So the title of this panel calls us to think beyond the future. Not because the future isn't important, but because we've spent too much time being told that justice, that liberation, that the kind of education we dream of is always just out of reach. But Black feminist epistemology tells us that the future is happening right now, that we don't have to wait for permission to teach in ways that honor our truths, that we don't have to wait for the academy, for institutions, for policy changes to validate what we already know is real.
So as we move into this discussion, we ask that you think not just about what education could be in some imagined future, but also what it must be in this very moment. How do we create classrooms, curriculum, and learning spaces that refuse to be complicit in systems of exclusion? How do we also make space for the kind of knowledge that doesn't just inform, but transforms? How do we teach in a way that honors our grandmothers, our mothers, our ancestors? How do we embody radical presence in a world that is always trying to erase us?
That is the work. That is the charge. And that is the conversation that we're here to have today.
Welcome to Beyond the Future, Education as a Radical Act of Presence using Black Feminist Epistemologies. Let's get into it. So I'm going to introduce myself first. My name is Shapel LaBorde. I'm a first-year doc student at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York. I did my second master's there in P&E, and I'm also a K-12 ESL teacher, presently working in an elementary school in Queens, New York. I'm a proud mama scholar. I have a 5-year-old, and I'm also a wellness entrepreneur and community activist. Ashley.
Okay, hi.
Whoever's called to go next.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. So my name is Ashley Jones. I'm a graduate of Howard University School of Business. On my way to law school, I'm also an independent scholar and writer. I too am a mother of a 6-year-old little girl. I'm a holistic practitioner as well as a business owner. I have a background in finance. So that's a little bit about me. Excited to be here today and engaging in this discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Malika Clyburn. I like to refer to myself as a special education practitioner. I've been in education in the DMV area for the last 11 years. I have transitioned out of the public setting and into the non-public setting. And I am also an entrepreneur, like a lot of the young women up here, where I like to dabble in, nail art and nail design. So I'm a licensed nail tech. I have 2 children, 5 and 2 years old, and thank you for letting me share what some of my lens is going to be from today.
Hey everyone, my name is Whitney Garr. I'm a land landscape designer. I'm a food systems planner. I live in the city of Atlanta. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. I'm the granddaughter of a sharecropper. I bring that identity with me into spaces professionally and personally as I think about food, land, identity, labor, regenerative practices. What else? I'm a mother. I have a 3-year-old daughter named Cypress. I'm also an independent researcher, I guess is how you would call it, looking a lot at food systems work and land use. And now, since becoming a mother, thinking a lot more intentionally about how my child is educated and education versus schooling. Hybrid, homeschool, educator, mom, those things. So, thank y'all.
Lastly, my name is Naomi Simmons-Thorne. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Illinois. I'm studying philosophy of education. I'm also a Black feminist scholar. My approach to Black feminism is based on Black left feminism and also new material Black feminism. And so I'm really interested in questions about Black women's relationship to the conceptions of like humanity and the human being. I'm also interested in Black women's critiques of the state and state violence against Black women and girls,
Thank you.
including education institutions.
Thank you. I'm so disappointed with the fact that we can't show you this presentation. And I wish that would it be helpful if we kind of have the computer here for you guys to see some of this imagery? Or, yeah, can we take the computer? Anybody's computer? I'm going to start with one of the things on the slides because I feel like I really engage this conversation with visuals integrated in it and not just us talking at you and having a conversation. So this presentation and this discussion will invite participants to discuss, critique, and explore how philosophical inquiry can shape an education attuned to present ethical commitments and community needs, specifically considering marginalized and increasingly culturally diverse communities in schools. The future is not a distant goal, but an emergent reality shaped by the actions of today. So, Black feminist epistemology is grounded in the lived experience as a criterion of meaning, use of dialogue, the ethic of personal accountability, and the ethic of caring, as defined by Patricia Hill Collins. So in this framework, listening to stories matter, it's a priority. Sharing is powerful. Feelings and experience are the teachers. In conversation, we have my lovely friends. Some of these women are scholars, some of these women are community workers, and most of us are mothers or working with children in some shape or form. So for today's presentation, we have a couple motivating questions. We'll start there, and then we'll go to some of the questions that we have created as a group. So the motivating questions for today. Yeah, this is so much better. Can you see that? I did a lot of pink, a lot of color. Okay, you can see a little bit, but we really want to share it with you all because we thought it was important to have this with the voice. Okay, so the first question is, can the future still serve as an animating idea in education, given today's social and ecological challenges? The second question is, how might focusing on present-day ethical engagement better serve educational goals than future-oriented aims? The third question is, in what ways can philosophical pedagogy and curriculum design foster agency, critical awareness, and community responsiveness? So we're going to meditate on these for a while, and hopefully you'll meditate on it for a minute or so, and then we're gonna think about these ideas. So anybody can take any one of these questions to start speaking about.
Sure. So I'm emphatically a futurist, and I believe in Black feminist futures. And I think that what motivates that idea for me is the fact that Black women intellectuals and Black feminists have always been on the cutting edge of social thought and theory, and have always advanced our provinces about what we think is possible. And I think that that also plays out in education as well. And so I'm thinking about, for example, like Anna Julia Cooper, who has like made so many like profound contributions to education. And I think about how, for example, how she very astutely was able, as Washington D.C. was like moving towards like its desegregated school system, how she was able to encapsulate and predict all of the phenomenon that we've seen come out of like the Brown decision, the 38,000 Black teachers who lost their jobs, the loss of principals and school leaders, and the alienation of Black students in white and so-called integrated schools. And what that points to is the fact that I think that, like, when we listen to Black women and listen to what Black women say about the future, I think that we're all the better for it. And I also think about how in education, Black women thinkers have been very pivotal in creating like the concepts and the categories that we use to analyze education and educational injustices. And so I'm thinking about for like Angela Davis, for example, who really helped pioneer like abolition theory and abolition educations, and how important that analysis has become in our neoliberal educational present, where educational institutions are very embedded in carcerality. Educational institutions are often pipelines for Black students going to prisons. They're often sites where Black girls are assaulted by police officers and school resource officers. And so the fact that Black women were like on the frontiers of not only identifying these injustices, but capturing them in very sophisticated intellectual idioms, I think speaks to the power of Black feminist futurities. It makes me a believer in our ability to continue doing that.
Thank you. And just to go off of what Naomi's saying with Anna Julia Cooper and her, I call her one of my intellectual foremothers. And just thinking about her, and also Sirwana, who is often cited for her works and poems and protests. What I discovered in working closely with Sirwana, alongside Anna Julia Cooper, Sirwana is always cited as a Latin intellectual, a mother of feminism and intellectual thought for the Mexican intellectual framework. But she's also an Afro-Latina, and I think about this concept of erasure, and I would like to reclaim her as an Afro-Latina specifically, because I think like the whitewashing of our mothers and this idea that, you know, well, we never had this framework, we never had these intellectual traditions because they're not recorded in the ways that they're recorded in the academic institutions. So just thinking about both of them and thinking about the ideas of ancestors, I'm very big on ancestors, and I think that in Black women's intellectual traditions, ancestral work is very important because you consider yourself an ancestor in training. You think about who and what you're going to leave behind and how that continuum happens. So in part of doing that work, you have to presently engage with what the bodies are going through day to day, and how to survive and how to get through this, how to navigate a world that is consistently trying to disembody you from your lived experience, tell you that what you're going through is not actually happening, the gaslighting in every aspect of society. And I think about how Anna Julia Cooper, as an educator, she really moved through her community and often spoke up in spaces like this and talked about with passion, using her voice about the things that were going on in her community, and really changed the space energetically. And I think of her as a foremother to our intellectual tradition, because that is what Black women have to lean on, is our voice and our experience and our experiences of going through our communities and engaging with this oppression and trying to be liberated from it, and coming back into spaces when we have privilege, and letting people know like this is what's going on. So I do think that while the future is very important, I think that what Black feminist epistemology has to offer is the survival of the Black body today. Like what we speak on, what is happening in our communities with these bodies who are going through experiences today, so that we can ensure that people in the future, our descendants, will have an opportunity to push our people and our community forward. So I think for Angela Cooper and the way she moved through DC, the way she moved through all the different spaces, the way Sirwana, faced persecution as a mixed person, and being a person in a religious, within the religious institution, going through extreme persecution. I think all of this voice and all of this embodiment really informs the type of tradition we have today, and we can't dismiss it. We can't act like these things are small, not important. We need written evidence and all of those things. I think we need to really center how can we push the voice forward so that we can hear voices in the future. If anybody want to comment on that, we can do that, or we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I had a little, lived experience context to this conversation around future and just the role of Black women in centering the moment and thinking about the body. As a mom, like my daughter goes to this abolition focused school, and they spend a lot of time doing breath work with toddlers, taking time to go outside, inviting in the Muskogee Nation each time they want to plant a new tree on their campus at the school. And also having larger conversations around Cop City, even with children. If there are members that have passed away, within the children's family, inviting in this conversation of grief. And I just mentioned some of those because the range of topics, they seem pretty wide. And even for me, I realized the school is owned by a Black woman, and she takes a lot of inspiration from the scholars that have already been mentioned. And there's a lot of power in being able to think about what you're supposed to be doing as an ancestor in training, and how we're pouring into literally the youngest of our future activists, and then also what types of tools might be helpful at that young age, 0 to 6, as their brains are developing, that may hopefully mitigate some of the trauma that we continue to hold in our Black bodies, by them having a chance to learn these skills before they necessarily are confronted with the realities that sometimes are, not sometimes, but at some point are experienced with the Black body. I think it's very difficult to talk about Black futures and the role of Black women in educational spaces without starting first with the body and acknowledging that most Black women at some point have not felt safe in their body. So what this educational future looks like without addressing the core first is it's wild.
So we'll move on so that others can jump in with our next question. But in an ideal world, you would have saw this big on a projector. And I think it would have made you, because the whole idea was that engaging with the visual and our voices here in this space, in this particular space, right? At this particular conference, it would have given a profound impact in your experience today. So here, oftentimes, as a scholar in academia, I often hear, or I often have to recover and remember those voices that did the work before me in different ways. And I have to be very creative, and that was the idea of the presentation, but also creative in the ways that I say, while these voices did not get a chance to get a philosophy degree or be an expert on theorizing, they have created pathways for me to be liberated and to be in this space today. And I have to use them as the anchors instead of using the same old people we talk about. Because quite frankly, I'm sick of talking about the same people. There's a lot of other people I can talk about, and this is what this idea was. So here in this visual, which I'll share again with you all, is of course Angela Davis, Bell Hooks, Naomi, you can talk about some of your scholars. June Jordan, Alexis, Pauline Gums. I even have my grandmother here. I will never stop talking about my grandmother. I know that some people get annoyed. They may feel like, oh gosh, I'm supposed to talk about my grandmother again. But I will talk about my grandmother to the day that I am no longer here, because for me, that is an intellectual anchor in my life. And I put her in this presentation, and I'm sure all of us can speak on our aunties and our grandmothers and how they shaped us to be here at this table today. I also have a friend who is in philosophy, and she was a couple classes under me at Spelman, and I think it's important that we also lift as we climb. And our relationship is very motivating because we go through similar experiences in the institution of being educators and being women in philosophy of particular background, right? So I think it's very important for us to elevate our voices and also just remind you all that we've been here, we've had the work, and we were denied many a time, but without these creativities and these voices, we wouldn't be here to do this conference, and to do this panel today at this conference. So our first question, which I'll let Malika, Ashley, or Whitney, or Naomi get into, is how do you define radical presence in your work, and how has this concept influenced your approach to education or your scholarship? I also want to invite all of you to think about that, because I think sometimes we engage in a lot of disembodied work, and I want you all to just meditate on how you would define a radical presence in your work, and how has that concept influenced your approach to education or your scholarship in academia. So take a moment to think, and my sisters up here are going to take a moment to think and look at their notes.
Well, I know in my work, the way that I've approached this is to, for one, acknowledging differences and welcoming space for those differences. I think that, especially in the field that where I am, for one, a lot of the students that I work with are overly identified, in the special education system of, having this, emotional disabilities or, unfortunately intellectual disabilities, and misdiagnosed at that. And really it all boils down to a lack of understanding in how to cater to differences, a lack of tolerance. And so for me, as a Black woman educator, being in the room, having that opportunity to point it out, and as an educator, if we're talking about how we differentiate, how we scaffold or how we accommodate, why aren't we acknowledging the everyday lives that these students are experiencing, and then how the lived experiences of our youth and their communal experiences walk into the school with them on a day-to-day basis. They don't get to, unfortunately, we would like for school to be that safe place, right? But the reality is they do not get to leave it when they walk into our doors. And so how do I get to, in my work, think about, well, how do we create community? How do we create a safe place for our students so that when they are with us, they don't have to be in a constant battle of fight or flight. And so that's one of the ways that I get to approach that on a day-to-day basis.
So for me, adding into the conversation now, with the line of work that I've been into, and then also myself being an advocate in the community, empowering a lot of young girls, young women, really focusing on the understanding of making sure that they have a sense of identity, right? Knowing who they are, not who they're told that they are. And so within our communities, like we've spoken about, our lived experiences and focusing on that. Being a mother to a 6-year-old child, I feel like a radical stance that I take is just making it a point to pour into her, making it a point to know, where she comes from. Our family comes from, we have a line of ancestors that are Lenape, we are indigenous. And then the other side of our experience is immigrants coming here, from the island of Jamaica. So there's a couple different things going on, a theme, and just making sure that she understands what her role is, who she is. I come from a time where I had a time going to an all-white school. When I lived in Long Island, New York as a little girl, I was the only Black student. And so a lot of times people don't think about that when they're the majority. They're not, that singular person. And that was such a different thing. I was 6 years old. So there was no representation for me. I felt uncomfortable in my skin, as Whitney said earlier. Like Black women usually grow up to feel uncomfortable within who they are. I didn't like my hair. I didn't understand why we looked different. I didn't understand, our cultural differences. Even for school holidays like Thanksgiving, kids are bringing in their favorite foods, maybe spaghetti, they're Italian. I'm bringing in oxtail and rice and peas. I'm from Jamaica, and then not getting a positive response, like, ew, what's that? Because they weren't used to me or my culture. So again, when I'm saying the radical presence is just building up young people, especially in my case, I specialize in young women, young girls, and empowering them from small ages so they don't have to unlearn a whole bunch of things, as adults, because we all know, different walks of life. We all go through things, right, and traumas and experiences, and then we get to a point where it's like we have to unlearn all of that to now be able to walk forward in our truth and who we are. So again, I feel like as Black women, we're at a double disadvantage because again, we're told that sometimes we're too loud, we're too this, we're not good enough, or we're too bold, and just walking in our truths, not being afraid to share our viewpoints in these conversations. So again, just to circle back, for me, it's just empowering young people to hold their heads up high, know who they are, walk forward, be confident, have a sense of identity so that doesn't get stolen from them. And again, tying that into doing the work now so we don't have too much damage control later on.
Yeah. I was going to say, with radical presence, I think it's important again to start with the body. So I'm speaking about this as a mom with my daughter, and I think about her taking up more space as a Black woman. We start with the senses. So going on walks, we go on plant walks, we're smelling things, we're touching things. I'm encouraging her to take up space and to engage and to be curious, to use her throat chakra, to speak up, to ask me questions, to make observations, all skills that are powerful tools to use within the classroom. And I think by going out in nature, an environment that is not controlled, there's always something, that we can tap into. And when you feel disassociated, whether that be a trauma response or you're trying to protect yourself because you're in an environment you don't feel safe, I think that nature gives us that gift across the board. We just don't usually tap into it in that kind of way. So I think it starts there. Sometimes, your mind's just going, or you're going on a rabbit hole, or you're like, I can't figure out what my time is, just doing all these things. I'm like, let's go outside for a second and just recenter. So the presence of you are here in this moment, you deserve to be here, and you have something to gain and to give and to be in exchange.
Yeah, so I'm very influenced by Heidegger's critique of the metaphysics of presence, and I think there's a really important correlate to bring to this conversation, because I think it's really important for us to think about how the politics of presence does not always translate into liberation, and how our presence historically in white institutions has been used as a pretext, for example, for shutting down our own schools, for consolidation, for shutting down Black schools and historically Black colleges and universities. I think it's also important to note that as women who have all been through higher education institutions, our presence in these institutions are enabled by student debt and being indebted to the state. And so I think that it's really important to name that. What like Bettina Loves calls like educational sharecropping. The fact that our like desire for gainful employment and for like intellectual expression and activity has to come through modes of like indebtedness, and Black women disproportionately carries the country's burden of student loan debt. And so I think about how like presence can also facilitate like capture and captivity. And so I'm often critiquing like the metaphysics of presence and like thinking about like the politics of like marronage and like thinking about politics of what happens like when we're radically like not present.
And it's interesting that you say that because I did a lot of reading, not too heavy, but on the idea of a Black cognition and moving away from trying to fit the way I exist in this world as a Black woman, with particularities in my experience, and trying to disembody, distort my experience and my reality, and kind of have this schizophrenic engagement where I stuff that into a framework in order to get, praise and validation, and thinking about moving away from a framework having to fit what's already in place and not questioning the fact that radically I'm here in this room just as we all are, and how did I get here, and not telling me the ways in which I got here are not valid, because again, when we talk about presence radically and we talk about survival for the future, we have to engage with the fact that people's lived experience are top priority to how they are able to be in spaces and push this, the conversation forward. So with that being said, I like to take this opportunity because I like storytelling. That's an African epistemological way, before the text. And I would also like to say it's also a Greek way. Like, it was not sitting there writing with the scrolls, you had to memorize, you had to engage your body, you had to get in a particular posture and receive the oral tradition in that way before we started putting all this pressure and this emphasis on the text. So as an ESL teacher, as a person who has to create community, as we discussed up here, with students who have language as a barrier to getting the means to survive in society, I always think about how am I going to lower the affective filter, right? Because they come with a lot of things. And as a person who feels that embodiment of being from a particular background, I always think about, well, how can I create a space where you don't have to come in with all of that radically? How can I make that, if I've already been through it and I remember going through things and I had the privilege of education and I had particular privileges for being born in this space of America, how can I make sure that you can go forward without having to do the work of me being violent with the curriculum in front of me? I would rather take on the burden to be creative with this syllabus and this curriculum so that I can make your body and your everything that comes with that body, all the experiences, safer and able to be creative and more imaginative in the learning space. So I always think about how time is a construct, we know that, right? But like in the school building, time is like so rigid and violent. Like elementary school students come in and sometimes, depending on their backgrounds, they don't get a chance to eat breakfast. And I come from a grandmother who would not let me leave the house without eating breakfast. And I would not even try to leave the house without eating breakfast because I would get scolded later. But the idea that you need to really take care of yourself before you try to participate in the larger world. So I think about how sometimes students come with their emotions and we just kind of say, you cannot have these emotions in the learning space. We're here to do the work. I had a bad day. I see adults do this power struggle like, well, I had a bad day too. You don't even pay bills. And it goes on and goes on and goes on. But it's like this little person is supposed to get to a point, and what can you do to make it better? I let them have breakfast. I turn on jazz music and we have a little breakfast. Like, go get a bagel. We're going to come upstairs. Because how am I going to teach you? Like, how am I going to teach you? How am I going to get a good rating? All these things are performative for me as not just a scholar, but a person who comes from a particular ancestry background, I don't feel authentic in my practice if I just say, so what, you're upset, so what, that happened, so what, whatever, we gotta get to the work. Because the work is you. You are the work. You are the biggest work in this room, all of you. The work is that you will have a certain level of success where you feel that you are whole and you have all these creative possibilities. The paper, the text, those are not works. Those are important, but they're supplemental to you. You are the text. So I let the students really unpack, because I feel like as educators, we don't often remember, like Malika attested earlier, that students come in with a lot of things, and we're so busy trying to check off these boxes for our professional roles that we forget the people we're teaching today are going to dictate the society when we become vulnerable again, right? Like when we are, eventually life will disable us all, and we need to talk about that disability. And these students are the people, I don't want to take up too much space here with my sisters, but these students are the text, they are the work, they're the most important thing. And if they're coming in hungry, they're coming in with emotions, they're coming in with different things, we need to address that and not say the work, the papers, the computer, the standards are more important than the fact that their stomach is growling in the learning space. So, anyone else in the comment? Or we can go to the next question. Yeah? All right. Also, this is not traditional, and I like that, but does anyone want to come into our conversation on that note about radical presence? Yes, Silas.
I've been wondering about a question, and I think this is a good follow-up point. I want to hear about how you think about assessment in education, or whether it's your kids or whether it's students. I think you said something here about it's not about the product or what we're doing. I guess I'll say a little bit more about where I'm coming from. I'm now teaching all international students, and we're working from such diverse places, and trying to get to assessments is not working for me, and I'm wondering if you had wisdom for me. So how are you thinking? I'll do the application piece. I'm just wondering how you're thinking about it.
Okay. I could comment too, but
Well, first and foremost, the way that we assess in the traditional American system, if you want to look at our system, is very boxed in, and does not look at individuals. And as I mentioned before, it does not acknowledge difference. These assessments are meant to exclude a lot of times, unfortunately, Black and brown students, assessments do not take into consideration, culture. I'm somebody who does do assessments. I do educational assessments. And I'm sitting here reading the Woodcock-Johnston, and having the rapport with some of my students. I'm thinking in my head, I know that if I ask this question this way, they would get the correct answer, right? So even just and I know you say you work with international students, and you work with students who are learning English as a second language. For my students who are native English speakers, even for them, there's a linguistic barrier, So I think a lot of times assessments are an act of violence, intentional violence. I think that it's programming a lot of students to feel inferior, to strip confidence, and these things are done on purpose in Black spaces, right? And so we have to think about how do we engage our learners to show what they know, what modalities do they like to express in? What do they feel, represents their identities? And then again, like, how do we celebrate differences? But for me, it's very violent. I'll just stop there with that.
Answer. I think I'm not in the classroom, but I'll speak from my experience with design school. I think that's something that is not prioritized enough in this capitalist society. We focus on end product, right? Which is assessment is an end product. But there needs to be more evaluation and critique of the process. So a designer is encouraged to have a process and to accept that you're never on some linear journey. You can go back, you can reiterate what was your hypothesis. Let's go back and get some more background research. Let's, refine the design before we have the building, or before we have the landscape. I think that we should see more energy like that in the classroom, and that students deserve that level of iterative feedback. What are you doing that's working well? And also to invite the students in to be reflexive. What are you getting out of this, and what do you feel proud of? Where do you feel stuck? And to use mixed mediums, to play with clay, like engage touch, this connection between touch and brain, and understanding that maybe it's not necessarily that the teacher needs to have this like pedagogy of the oppressed position, the clipboard, but spin it on its head and asking them what are they getting out of it, if there's space, for that in the classroom. I think that's much more helpful when we're trying to build critical thinkers, right? Because if they're just waiting for you to tell them what they have, what does that look like? Then you go to the job, and I feel like we see this, rinse and repeat. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm waiting for the annual review, and then you're sweating, rolling your eyes about the annual review. And then what does it matter, after it's done? You get the promotion, you don't, or, whatever. But like how much more effective it can be with feedback along the way. That's a closed feedback loop.
In addition to that, I often think about assessment from like a value theory perspective, and so I'm often thinking about like what is the good in assessment, what is it good for, and I think that the problem with like our assessment regime is that when we see NAEP scores, when we see state report cards, what we should be looking at those scores and saying is not like this is a reflection of like student aptitude, of educator efficacy. It's a reflection of state crisis and state failures. And so this should be like data that the state is using to inform its own practices, to develop like programming and policies and structures that like closes these gaps and addresses like these like extreme like disparities that we see. And so I think that like I see the value in assessment, but I think that the part of the problem is that like we see like assessment as like being a tool for something that is truly not. It's not a tool for assessing the aptitude of a student, assessing the competency and efficacy of the educators. It's really about like what is our society doing and who is it doing it to. And so I often think that in that sense, that assessment can often serve as a dehumanizing assemblage, as a pretext for labeling people at risk, as a pretext for making people disposable, as a pretext for keeping people out of gainful employment and social mobility.
Yeah, especially with the prison to pipeline, school prison to school to prison pipeline. Ooh, wow. And racial capital, like Cedric Robinson talks about that too. I think assessment has been perverted for that reason, in a way where we start labeling like, well, we know these fourth graders in this particular community are going to consistently perform in this way if we put them in this structure. So let's just set up rooms in the local prison in that county or what have you for their lived experience, and then let's also use their labor and give them nothing for making what we use every day, because we live in a society of consumption. So I think we really need to use our voices. Like, I know that I now have the experience of being from the hood. I am from the hood, everyone. Yes, I am. I am from South Jamaica, Queens. And I was raised by a great grandmother, right? And my mom struggled with mental illness, and my dad was incarcerated. So I say that because that was my experience, and no one can gaslight me about that, but I'm still here in this room with you, and it was a particular way that I had to live and survive to be able to tell that story. So I know what works. We're not abstractly thinking about what works, and obviously it can't be universally applied because I have a particular experience, but it is a shared experience, right? So I know what can change I know what is needed to change a lot of communities that are in crisis, that are in a consistent cycle of death. So like, I use my voice now from my experience in educational spaces because I am privileged now. You know, I've had this transition of recognizing that, oh, well, you're not technically working class anymore. Okay? You're making this much money and this and that, but the ideologies are still there with the working class. I still live in my great-grandmother's house. I still have family who are all across the map. So I think about, what can I use my voice for at the table when we talk about in school leadership teams about assessment? What can I use my voice for? And I think that we need to take risk more. I think when you talk about what we could do, we need to take risks and say it's not working. I think we need to stop being afraid of losing our jobs and the privileges we have, and recognize that there's people who live on less and don't have the opportunity to use their voice in the ways that we can use our voices as educators in privileged spaces. I think we need to come together as educators and communities and go in and offer these creative assessment tools and move away from this rigid structure of assessment and start saying that we notice in our lived experiences as educators, this is consistently not working. But there's this fear, because it is a risk, in speaking in that way. But it's also gaslighting. Like, you know it doesn't work. We all know it doesn't work, and we take our check and we go home and we have our conveniences and we live our lives and we feel terrible inside because it's immoral and it's unethical. So I think I would like to call on all of us to try to find the ways to build communities and coalitions and use our voices to creatively think how we can say we need to move to something else. This is not working structurally. Oh, next slide. So we have question number 2 here. Black feminist epistemology calls for centering marginalized voices and lived experiences. What specific strategies do we use to embed this framework into our curriculum or research? So like in all of our lives, we all have different experiences at this table. Sometimes there's overlap, but what do we use from this framework of the lived experience, voice, verifications in our community?
Can you read the question again?
Yes, no problem. So the question again is, Black feminist epistemology calls for centering marginalized voices and their lived experiences. What specific strategies do we use here to embed this framework into our curriculum or research? Also, because we're doing a dialogue here, dialogue is also a critical part of, I really hate sometimes when we don't get to like jump in the moment in these sessions. So I was like, I really want to do that with you all, and I hope you're okay with it. But also you can think about what you're hearing from our lived experience and the idea of Black feminist epistemology as a framework. How would you use some of these strategies from Black feminists, right? So if the framework is the Western European tradition, now from what you experienced with us here and how we're doing these things, what kind of strategies would you use to inform your curriculum or your research? So first we're going to speak about it, and then you all can kind of jump in. Or Cal, you can speak about it.
I'm a little bit still back on the first question.
Okay.
I thought what Naomi said made me think the system is actually set up to achieve the outcomes that it achieves, and that when you say each student's differences need to be recognized, that can only happen if there's people resources in the room with the children. It cannot happen with 30 children and one teacher, and yet, so the assessments are set up to say, well, we know already that these students cannot achieve, so why should we bother to put another dollar? And as you said, instead we put the dollars into the carceral piece of the pipeline, or we'll put it into alternative schools, or we'll put it into teacher aides who are maybe delightful people but may not have the experience to address those, whether it's intellectual differences or cultural differences in all of those spaces. And so, I live in Syracuse, New York. It is a very, very, very poor school system. When I teach students, some of them are very keen about that, about centering the experience of students and doing the kinds of things we're talking about, and other students have given up because it does not seem like a good use of our limited emotional and physical resources to try to change, to do what you just said, Shapel. I don't know, and that's just a reaction to some of the things I heard in the last question.
And I do want to move away from this pessimism to the point where we kind of decided who is disposable. I know it is a burden of work, it's a lot of labor, but I believe in the labor and the work that my ancestors went through to put me here. I have to do it, you know what I'm saying? So I just feel like that has been bothering me the last couple of months, this idea of how do we collectively decide who's disposable? When we look at the lives of certain educators and people we hold to a certain esteem in our different disciplines, they come from very, very hard backgrounds. A lot of times when we do that, uncovering some of the people. So it's when we dispose of groups of people because of class status in that way, or even race, we are disposing potential for a whole new future in that way. We only need a couple of people to really change the world, right? We only need a couple of people to really shift the whole way we think. We only need a Malcolm X. That wasn't too much for y'all. Malcolm X, we only need look at Malcolm X. We don't get to say how do we collectively, I really want to sit and think about that. I mean, this might not be the time, but like you said, we are humans, we are in a body. We have become completely burdened by capitalism. It's eating itself, it's eating us up, it's eating everything, but we can't eat. And I think that we need to really think about how did we move into this space of being so existentially dreaded to the point where we're they're just gonna fail anyway, and we can't do anything about it. But how can we get that spirit matter that our ancestors had to just keep going and say there is possibility, there is potential, and we're gonna keep moving, I do believe we deserve rest in this revolution, but I also think we also need to think about who we are saying is disposable as a community of scholars.
I want to address that because I think this is what Cal just said. This is exactly where the metaphysics of presence comes in. And so Joy James, she talks about the captive maternal and captive maternalism. And so what she's referring to when she's talking about this is the way that Black women and Black girls insert their bodies where state failures occur. So because there's these state breakdowns, there's these state crises, these state failures, Black women then insert their bodies into a educational system, for example, as a teacher, that stresses them out, that impoverishes them, that overworks them, that exploits their labor. A Black girl will, especially if you're the oldest child, will step up and take care of her siblings, will be the tutor, will be the caretaker, the everything, where state programming ought to be. And I'm sure so many of us on this panel have had to step in and address these state failures with our own bodies, with our own resources, with our own lives, whether that's being healthcare advocates for people we love, whether that's being a counselor for students that we see ourselves in. And so, I think that a part of the way that our system reproduces itself is exploiting the fact that there's so many of us who are so oppositional to injustice that we will step in and put our bodies in, like where the city has failed.
It's true.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think I'm kind of like calling on some of the people in this room to start having a conversation. Like, you're witnessing this conversation of people in this space. Maybe this couldn't have happened in another capacity, and maybe the seriousness of it being on a program in this space and having it in this way, it may have, inspired maybe you to think about some of your privileges, because I mean, we have privileges too, but thinking about the way our bodies are taxed and labored in those ways, and how pain doesn't land equally on everyone. Burdens and all of those things, they don't land on everyone equally, and just thinking about like the ways you can use your voice, your privileges to do the work, and then take some of that labor away from groups who are
Tired.
yeah. I was like that's some philosophical
And just to jump in a moment, kind of tying into what you said before, people have this like defeatist attitude, and it's just kind of like, because a lot of people are tired, and it's like it's passed on, and it's passed on, and this is when do groups get a moment to just take a moment, reset. We can't as Black women, because we have to continue to keep going. We have to continue to fight every day so we have a voice. We have to fight every day so people take us seriously. So people, take away all these other images that are thrown onto us, and just to live in our authentic self. So it's so many different moving parts that every day we get up and we have to be so many different things to different people, and we don't, speaking again, feeling safe in your own body, having a moment to just and breathe. The world is like on our shoulders 24/7. So that's something to think about, in your lens, like when we have these conversations. Even up here, there's a million things going on in our heads. You know what I mean? We got kids, we got so much. And again, not to take it away, you all have a lot going on too. But we just have that added pressure when we think about intersectionality, because in this society, we are women, and then we're Black women. So it's just like, it's heavy. It's heavy. We don't get to take it off, So it's really nice when we could come together and have these real conversations, and we can understand each other, to understand how we come together and just to move forward,
I'm feeling encouraged over the past year or so by the growing number of Black homeschoolers, particularly in the state of Georgia. Like I said, my daughter, she goes to school, but I also now supplement and homeschool a lot with her at home, and have community around that. There are co-ops that are doing this work, and it makes me think about Adrienne Marie Brown and Small is All. And so instead of trying to continue to fight these massive, wicked, complex problems, tapping back in and removing this deficit mindset. And it's like, I have everything that I need within me, within my community. We don't necessarily need to just think about educating our children in these systems that we know are broken, which in and of itself is a privilege, right? To make that decision and to make those sacrifices. But I think about the alternative, and I can't really imagine anything else. I feel like I have to be an active participant in this, the education that my child receives, and knowing what my body went through, and knowing that wasn't enough. Like, how can I just repeat it again from a parental standpoint?
I think that, so for one, like, we know that, Black feminist scholars have told us that we have to be, have taught us that we have to be very well aware of and just conscious of intersectionality. And this is a hard question to answer, because really with that intersectionality, how do you create the systems of supports that that the curriculum is not providing, right? And so I really appreciate hearing you talk about your experience with homeschooling, and how you supplement your daughter's education, because I think in general we need to be having more conversations about, okay, we know that there are so many gaps. What supports are we building to close these gaps? what's not working, what do we need to remove, and so, you know, it's very much a conversation that needs to be had.
And what are we doing to like make space for joy and for Black kids to know that they really can do whatever the hell they want to do?
Yeah. Would anybody from the audience like to like tap in and tell us some of the things they do that kind of resists the system? Ginger?
Yeah, thank you guys. I just really appreciate your presence here in this space. And I'm thinking two things I'm thinking about, and this all is sort of stemming from like whose radical presence, like whose presence, and in what spaces. I think when I was teaching, thinking about, because again, whether we like it or not, the situation is 30 students and one teacher. And so the things that we have to try and do, you have to get creative, right? To bring in that joy, to bring in those spaces, the books that I'm choosing, the passages I'm having them read as an English teacher, the ancestors that I'm bringing into that space, who am I citing, who am I referencing? I think, who am I decentering intentionally? I think, and that, and obviously, Shapel knows some of that's gotten me in trouble. Can't teach in Florida anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, Florida. Yeah.
Okay, so, but now, you know, I have a really dear colleague and I who are doing our PhD together, but we do periodic, like, reference checks, and like, show me your reference list. Who are you citing? And it better not be mostly white men, right? Like, and so it's just like, I think there's so, I don't know, I think that there's so much that we can do, but I don't know if it's a lack of courage, a thoughtlessness, I don't know, but yeah, just, I think about my student teachers, particularly my student teachers of color, were like, can you find me some books for my classroom that center Black characters that aren't tragedies? And I'm like, yes, we can get those books in your room, right? I think about work, like, yes, you know, so as an English teacher, I did a lot of work in the ZTE, and I just adore Goldie Muhammad and her work. So I think just there's a lot of rejection that can happen of problematic assessment practices. You know, you can assessment is not inherently wrong. What are you assessing? And for who, right? So I don't know if that's speaking to it at all, but I'm just excited about working with you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, go ahead, Addison.
Thank you. I was thinking throughout all of your kind of engagement and dialogue with the questions, and when you kind of prompted us to think about what the rest of our responsibilities are, and I teach in teacher education and adult education in Canada, American, but I'm in Canada, and I usually start my classes with the recognition that this class doesn't happen without you here. I love teaching, I love getting paid to do it, but otherwise it would just be me in a classroom thinking about things. That it's ultimately for them, and so we do like feedback on the class, like community dialogue feedback to see how they're experiencing it, how it's going, what we can shift in real time, rather than just the end of the term assessment that goes to my department to decide whether or not they're going to hire me again for the next term. But then I was thinking about working with pre-service teachers, and there are so many teachers who, if they're from more privileged experiences or non-racialized or not indigenous, don't think it's their responsibility to take up some of these calls. And then specifically where I am in British Columbia in Canada, within the curriculum, within the policy, it is the job of the teachers to do a decolonial, anti-racist education. And so then working with people who, I find it a severe responsibility to work with people specifically who think it's not their responsibility and are not beholden to these oppressive realities. And I'm like, okay, but you are. And why are you not why are you not responding? And so you don't get to white teachers, non-racialized teachers, male teachers, non-disabled teachers don't get to opt out of these just because they don't have the burden on their shoulders. So I was thinking about that in teacher education, and this is really brought a lot to the fold, and I appreciate all that you shared. And I have more follow-up questions for each of you, but maybe we can talk later.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Allison. Yeah, so if you all have not caught on, we're not gonna do the Q&A at the end. You know, just tap in with us like regular people if you can after. But we're just gonna have dialogue, so we're giving you space now to like kind of ask these questions. Who wanted to go?
I just want to say one quick thing, which is, you have to tell me your name again.
I'm Whitney.
Whitney, I was just really intrigued by your connection to land and to production of food, because I do think those traditions are part of what has been lost by virtue of essentially a long history of separating Black people and Indigenous people from the land that they have cultivated all along. And there's people, I think, who are doing the sort of food revitalization of, so I think that's one space where a community effort is necessary. It's not individuals doing this, but it's like creating community farms and community markets in places where they may not exist. And the other space is one that's dear to me, which is the arts. And I think there's a community in Utica, Mississippi, where they're combining the two things. They are revitalizing the agricultural economy there, because the closest food market is 60 miles away. But the heart of the town center is also this arts space in which they're inviting people to come live there because they want a different kind of a life, a different form of education for their children. And so I think there's a lot, among the five of you, there's a lot of creative moments to think about, not just fight the system, but what are we pouring in? And that's, I think, part of the radical presence that I'm hearing from you guys too.
Right. Like, you resist the rubber band is stretched, then what? You know, because I think that's one of the roles of design. What's next? Take the radical Black imagination and spatialize it into real forms.
We don't have enough time for our last question, but Ashley wants to just leave it all with you, and maybe we can engage as we have our little break. So she's going to leave you with the last question, and we're going to wrap up.
All right, so our last question is, what challenges do you see in shifting the narrative of education from being future-focused to present-centered, particularly in institutions that emphasize measurable outcomes? So basically what we were speaking about.
Yeah, we got to your place. Yeah, so I just want to say, again, if you want to get the, presentation, I can email it to you all. Just remember, it is our labor of love. Cite a Black woman today, tomorrow, and forevermore. And I just want to say thank you all for being in space with us. And before we go, where'd you go back? What was the bag that we doing? Oh, no, that was a Trader Joe's bag. Oh yeah, so there's 4 minutes left. Yes, so while you all are asking these questions to the rest of my lovely sisters, I have to grab something.
Closing thoughts.
Okay, so
we're gonna get some closing thoughts.
So I just wanted, and then we'll take another question. For my closing thought, I also just kind of wanted to tap on what Ginger was speaking about. First of all, thank you for having the courage, to think for yourself, but think about what your students need, the kids that you're serving in your community and what they need. And I think a lot of times too, we were speaking about yesterday, especially young children constantly reading stories that only show them in negative lights, or we only see that. I had the experience of living in Italy. I studied in Venice years ago for like 2 years, and I had a lot of friends from Africa. And silly me, I lived everywhere. So, coming from New York, I'm like, oh, there's so many Africans here. I didn't realize, but part of that experience was amazing because I got to make friends with a lot of Africans and having that dialogue as African American versus African, and them speaking to us and saying, our problem with America is when you turn on your TV Saturday morning, they're talking about starving children every day. When in reality, we have so many billionaires in Africa. We have, 4 cities with, doing a lot of tech, a lot of forward thinking, a lot of innovation, technology. Why are we not showcasing that? So giving us the opportunity to shed light on other areas so these kids can be empowered. They can know, the future, the sky is the limit. June Jordan spoke about empowerment through education, through art, just letting them see themselves, on these other mediums, being creative. So I don't know if that was a lot. I should have thrown it in there in 30 seconds. But yeah, so that was my thought, my closing thought.
My closing thoughts would be provoked by something you said, Naomi, when you just mentioned, assessments do have, a space, but, it's more so of just, who are they serving, right? And so just, getting back into, as I go back, I guess on, the front line, like I do every day, making sure that I'm more vocal about, creating assessments that are acknowledging the child that's in front of me. I try to do it the best I can, but also just creating more space for, and thinking of what Whitney has shared today, creating more space for real world experiences, because real world experience can be a form of assessments, but we're really in a space where that's not allowed. So how do I work in the system against the system? Because I'm a special educator. It's specialized instruction. So why is that not something that's more welcome in my space? So just thinking through these issues and problems.
Yeah. I wanted to read something from Nikki Finney that just kind of, I feel like we've done enough talking up here, but this.
That's my former professor.
Oh, I love. This is from a chapter entitled More Than Sass or Silence, the creative potential of Black girlhood. I have been asked at least 100 times to travel and talk to young girls about the path of my own life. I have been honored to do so, but I have never been asked to travel and to listen to any young girls talk about how they see the world or how they think the world sees them. Always while there, in the middle of whatever I have come to say, even if I look up and reach out in hopes of lifting up a two-way conversation into the air, most of the girls still look lost. What could I possibly want to hear from them? I just kind of want to leave that there. I think sometimes just taking a moment in whatever spaces we're coming from in the educational space. Who am I listening out for? What can I do in this moment? What is something that's achievable that I can take from the small chunks? Because a lot of these conversations that we're having about the future, we're not bringing the future into these spaces. We need to acknowledge that we always have something to learn from them. And we're just speaking, today from our perspective.
Thank you so much, Whitney. And Naomi is going to give us the last closing. I know everybody's itching because we got to go to the next one. Naomi's going to do her closing thought. I'm going to do my closing action, and you all will be free.
Just really quickly, I'll just say, number one, bring the state back into philosophy of education and education more broadly. I think as I read philosophy of education, the state is often absent, although it creates the background conditions for a lot of the issues that we talk about. And just secondly, also think about the radical possibilities of Black feminist absence. So what it looks like when we withdraw ourselves from things that don't serve us, when we withdraw ourselves from systems that are collapsing and that can't serve our needs, and when we do new things, for example, the Black independent school movement right now, we're which is like flourishing in Illinois where I am. There's this collective called the Indigo Homeschooling Association, which is a Black homeschooling association out of Chicago. So things like the Black Independent School Movement, I think, point to what it looks like when we do Black feminist radical absence.
Thank you, Naomi. So, my grandmother, yes. My grandmother told me that you should give people flowers while they're living. So I just want to publicly, I'm very big into public displays of love. So they don't even know they was getting this, y'all. This is not scripted. I want to just say thank you to all my friends who took time out their very busy lives. They met with me virtually, New York, Georgia, Chicago, and here in Maryland. And my ancestors told me there would be one more Black woman in the room. So I just want to say thank you for all your work. And I see us, and I hope you all enjoyed this community display of love and all our brilliance today. Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll be around and doing ask questions. Thank you. Enjoy the conference.
Okay.